The Henschkes have been growing wine grapes here in the Eden Valley since the 1860s. The phylloxera pest outbreak of the late 1800s wiped out vineyards around the globe. But South Australia was spared, so this block, Hill of Grace, has some of the oldest grapevines in the world. Prue Henschke is trained in both botany and zoology, and she applies that knowledge to viticulture. She cares for all 120 hectares of Henschke vineyards and has transitioned to using organic and biodynamic techniques.
It started off looking at mulching, so we were really concerned about holding the soil that we have already in place and not having any erosions. And we wanted to retain the moisture because we're dry grown. And we also wanted to keep the temperature more even during those hot months in summer. We started with the straw. It's actually triticale straw, so it's durable. It lasts for 3 years.
Okay.
And they're quite long pieces, so it sits there and doesn't break down so quickly. It also inhibits the weeds, so you can see there's a big cover of marshmallow here, but none under the vine.
And underneath that, you've got the compost?
Yes.
And what do you make the compost from?
Well, we make our own from grape stalks out of the vintage process. And yeah, we do a biodynamic compost heap, so we layer that together with cow manure, and it forms the most beautiful compost. It's really quite rich, and earthworms just adore it. And it's got an added benefit. We don't have to use any herbicide.
Like all viticulturists, Prue has one big task in winter: pruning. On these vines, she uses a traditional method that promotes sap flow. Each vine ends up with one new cane and one new spur on either side of the vine.
We've got a good spur here. And the idea is to always have that first bud underneath, so you can get that continual sap flow. And then the next bud, which will be next year's cane, sitting up here.
Okay.
And we chop right back towards here. And this will be our cane. And we want to put on about 10 to 12 buds. And I usually cut through the bud because there's a firm disc at the top, and that'll stop any entry of fungus.
Okay.
So there we are. That's next year's cane.
Yeah.
And then we just remove this one. And then just to take the old wood away, it's just perhaps a little wrap. And there we are. We're ready for next year.
Okay. So you do the same on the other one?
Yes.
A wood-rotting fungus called Utipa, which kills vines, has become a major concern for grape growers worldwide. As Prue said, she prevents spores entering the canes by cutting through the bud, but cutting through old wood needs treatment.
If you do make a cut, you paint it.
Right.
So you can see we've used brown paint, not white paint.
Yep.
And I guess the other thing is really to prune when it's dry.
Okay.
So not in any sort of misty weather, because that misty weather releases the spores off the old woods.
Not far from Hill of Grace is Shillings, a new vineyard where Prue is trialling native companion planting to promote an organic means of pest control. Prue, this is a native plant. This is sweet Barossa growing on the end of a row of vines. It's not what you usually see.
No, you usually see roses, and I was always against doing that. So it was a great opportunity to test out my idea that perhaps Barossa, because it flowers at the same time as the vine, would really help in controlling our pests in the vineyard, especially at that time.
Caterpillars of the light brown apple moth ruin grapes by feeding in the bunches and promoting the fungal disease botrytis. Sweet Barossa is like an insectary plant. Everything loves it.
Yep.
Butterflies, native bees. What in particular are you trying to attract with it?
The wasps. I guess there are other things, but the wasps are the ones that target the eggs of the light brown apple moth. So by giving them a bit of habitat, a bit of nectar for food, we can then concentrate them in against the vineyard, and hopefully they do their work.
So have you seen a benefit since doing this?
We haven't had to spray for light brown apple moth for years.
Wow.
So I think it's really helping.
Another pest is the Australian grapevine moth.
It can demolish a vine overnight.
It skeletonises the leaves,
Yes,
doesn't it?
exactly. It just goes whoosh straight through. And that is actually controlled by shield bugs.
Okay. Once again, it's the Barossa that initially attracts the caterpillar-eating shield bugs. And although they don't look like much in winter, Prue also uses wallaby grasses to attract beneficial insects, retain moisture, and to compete with weeds. Lamandra grows happily under the vines and is another wasp attractor.
They found out that 20 metres is about the span
Okay.
of their flight path, and that's the idea, is to try and bring a nectar-providing plant that can actually cope with the machinery that go past it into the middle of the vineyard as well as on the ends of the rows.
There's no doubt that Prue thinks the days of Australian vignerons planting roses at the end of each row of vines are over.
And maybe even through agriculture we should think about bringing our natives right in against our production areas, because there are benefits.
And does it make better wine?
Of course it does. I mean, if you've got something that's helping you in your production, you've got less inputs, the vine's able to live with less stress, less impact, and put more of its energy into producing flavour.